we're definitely going up in the ranks because we've got Air Vice Marshal Hugh Slatter today. So we're moving with the main guys at the moment. Hugh, I met back in the mid-70s when he was a group captain, I think, in Umtali Op Thrasher. And I honestly don't know anybody from the Rhodesian Airforce who I think is more highly regarded and liked than Hugh Slatter. A wonderful officer and a wonderful gentleman. And later on, I want Hugh to tell us a bit more, because there's another story to Hugh, and that is the role he played in making Nick Price the #1 golfer in the world. But
to me, yeah.
I think that'll get Nick's attention, Hugh, but we can deal with him a bit later. But welcome, and thanks for spending some time with me.
No, thank you for those kind words, Hannes. That's nice of you. I appreciate it. And I remember our first meeting, and I remember your father particularly when I was in Ontario. He was such a good man. Yeah, I was on the Field Force unit then. I was a wing commander, actually. Okay. And I was lucky enough to work with Gary McIntyre at 3 Brigade. Our headquarters were in the old Cecil Hotel, grand old place. And every so often, the TERS would try and fire rockets or mortars at us, and they'd rattle around. They weren't that good with their aim. Most of them landed on the golf courses, as someone reminded me. Yeah, anyway, I joined the Air Force in '62, Hannes. It was kind of on a whim. I'd always been interested in airplanes, but I'd flunked out of college, out of university, as we called it. I was studying architecture, didn't get on with my dean very well, jumped on a motorbike. My parents didn't know I had a motorbike, went home, much to their surprise. And they said, well, what are you going to do? They were very understanding. So I said, I'll find something temporarily. I joined the archives and worked there for a while. And then I saw the ad for the Air Force. And I thought, you know, that kind of appeals to me. So that was a long selection process. And I guess I scraped through by the skin of my teeth, along with some great other people who became good pilots and so on. Ian Bond, Prop Geldenhuys, of course, Al Bruce, Chris Dixon, Green Leader. Various others. Chris, of course, is no longer with us. Bruce Collicott is no longer with us. Rest in peace, you guys. Great, loyal Rhodesians. Anyway, so we went through pilot training, which was a fascinating course. It was basically 2 years, 18 months to get wings and then 6 months to do weapons qualification.
Just tell us what aircraft you started on, and what, just work us through.
We took a on basic flying school, which was a big 9-cylinder Pratt & Whitney radial. Alva, sorry, not Pratt, it was an Alvis Leonidas. It was a difficult airplane to fly because it was narrow undercarriage, tail dragger. So if you could land that thing in a crosswind, you could pretty well land most things. It was good test, lots of rudder, lots of torque from the motor. So good test. Through basic flying school on the Promise and then onto the Vampire. Only the twin-seater for advanced flying school. I never cared for the Vamp. It was a very uncomfortable cockpit for me. I was a strange shape. I always felt like I was hunched and hanging in the harness of the ejection seat. But got through that and then onto the OCU, which had the twin-seater and the single-seater. And I loved the single-seater, the FB9. It was like a baby F-16 without the power because it had a nice bubble canopy. You sat well up. I had plenty of room. And whenever we flew ops, I tried to get on the FB9 because I was so much more comfortable. It didn't have an ejection seat. That was the big problem. And we had some accidents with people trying to bail out. There was no good bailout technique for the FB9, and people bumped on the tailplane on the way out and were unconscious and didn't open their chutes. We had a few of those, not too many. Anyway, so that was OCU. Then I was posted to 4 Squadron, Internal Security. Not a whole lot going on, although if you say the war started in '65, I guess we saw the start of it doing patrols around the country, learning the countryside. And then in short succession on to 7 Squadron, which was probably the most interesting time that I had. We were just starting operations. Nothing like as fierce as at the end of the '70s, where our guys were fighting it out literally every hour of every day. And I take my hat off to them, and to the RLI and the SAS and all the other troops. So that was my taste of working with the army and the police. Later on, it became working with internal affairs, guard force, and all the others. But in those days, 7th Squadron was, it was active, but it was nothing like the later years. And then from 7, I went back to the training squadron where I was doing training. Then I was posted down to South Africa. I'll tell you a funny story about this. I was called from Thornhill to headquarters to a meeting with SO training. And he called me into his office and he said, Hugh, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I'm going to send you on a course to South Africa for 3 months. It's the administration course. I said, I'm really sorry, but I couldn't find anybody else. So I went back to Thornhill, thoroughly motivated, of course, with a speech like that. You know, sorry, you couldn't find anybody else. I won't mention his name, but it always amuses me. And anyway, that admin course became the staff course, which was a highly sought after course. That's the course that you have to do. Very few people were lucky enough to get on it. It takes you from field rank to general rank, or qualifies you to go to general. Then back to joint planning staff, where I worked with Norman Walsh, the great Norman. And we would spend hours writing papers, and Norman would have the solution before we'd put pen to paper, because he had that great analytical mind of his. And then back to some training squadrons, back to 2 Squadron. I commanded 2 Squadron, through some operations on VAMPs. And then what happened after 2 Squadron? Oh, then we went on that famous top secret exercise to South Africa, Op Virgo. Our VAMPs were getting a bit long in the tooth, and we were going to buy 326s from the SAF. Nice little training aircraft, tandem seating and nice ejection seats, nice instrumentation. And we did our first course down there, 29 PDC. The interesting thing about 29 PDC is they are such an integrated bunch that they've had course reunions about every 5 or 10 years, and I've attended the last couple. Really good bunch. You probably know a few of the names: Ray Harkinson, Nigel Lam, of course, who went on to become European and world, I think, aerobatic champion. Won the Red Bull Air Races in 2014, if I remember correctly. Just a great pilot.
Hugh,
And then
I'm just going to jump in there.
Yeah.
I want to take you back to, because I think it's an interesting period in the history of the war. The early operations that the Rhodesian Airforce was involved with in Mozambique with the Portuguese before they abandoned their colonies. I know you spent a bit of time. Just tell us a little bit about that, those early days.
Yeah, Hannes, we were involved. I was on 7th Squadron then, and we used to be detached to Mozambique for about 10 days at a time, I think. We normally worked out of Tet and then north of Tet, right up near the border with Zambia. Those were kind of difficult times. The Portuguese had a very different operating approach. They had people in protected villages. You weren't really safe on the roads. They were normally fairly heavily mined. There wasn't a lot of ground defense to worry about, ground-based defense against you. But I found them difficult times. We had some nasty incidents. I report one in my book where some locals were actually gunned down, which caused me to put my resignation into the Air Force. I mean, it was a horrendous incident, and I was more appalled that nothing seemed to be on track to be done about it. Anyway, I ended up with an interview with the commander, and he assured me he'd spoken with the top Portuguese for us, and that sort of thing would be dealt with more severely and would stop. So I withdrew my resignation, but it was a tough time, and a lot of our guys worked with the Portuguese, and I mean, they were very hospitable and very friendly. But you know, these were bankers and lawyers and so on out of Lisbon who were put into the operating theatre, and it just wasn't right. They had no clue what was going on. So I wasn't really surprised when the Portuguese pulled out. It was never a war that they had their hearts in. Anyway, yeah. I don't know, Mr. George, do you want to know a bit more about that? I have mixed feelings about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you totally. I think a lot of them were out of place and they weren't really equipped to fight that kind of war. They were a little bit out of their depth. And that's, yeah.
You know, one of the things that comes to mind was we used to put the choppers under revetments at night and then sort of go into heavily sandbagged, almost underground areas. And, you know, you'd find a cook who'd come and knew a bit of English and you'd talk to you. He might have been a banker or a lawyer in Lisbon. And then after dinner, he'd pull out a guitar and they'd sing fado. Fado is a brilliant form of folk singing that the Portuguese have. And it was always sad to me because they'd sing about the old fado songs with families and what was going on. And I really felt for those guys. I mean, we would go back to our families in a couple of weeks. They would be on call up for a year or 18 months. Tough times for them.
Hugh, were you, I know Ronry Daly was in there with the RLI in those early days. Were you working with Ron and those guys?
No, I don't remember too much of that in Mozambique. I mean, I remember Ron and a lot of his great subbies who we worked with in Rhodesia. I was more closely associated with the RLI in my early days on 7th Squadron. You know, guys like Pat Armstrong, Jerry Strong, Nigel Henson, I can go on and on. Just the greatest young men that our country has ever had, in my view. Some of them didn't survive. The people that I've mentioned all survived, of course, and I have the utmost respect for that crowd. They were wonderful, brave young men who served the country proudly and loyally.
Okay, Hugh, you went down to Langebaan for a while on a secret secondment, which I think we're at liberty to talk about now, but an interesting period in your career.
Yeah, that was Op Virgo, and there's so many funny stories about that, other than the fact that the guys did a great job. We had great engineering support. We sent our engineers down with us. We went through all the training. And of course, we were kitted out as staff folks because it was a top secret operation. And I don't know if you're aware that the staff operated 1 month English and 1 month Afrikaans. So a couple of our guys had no clue on Afrikaans. I had a little bit from staff course, but not much. So, you know, all the radio work was in Afrikaans and on and on. And the one guy who was very English on our training course, the nicest young guy, had the hardest time with Afrikaans, but he tried. And the one time when he called up for taxi, this is in my book, and there are two words that are very similar in Afrikaans. One is aangenaam, which is pleasant or enjoyable. The other one is algemeen, which is general. So the right word is to call for algemeen flying, for general flying. And he kept getting it wrong. He kept saying aangename vlieg. And finally the ATC guy said, don't you mean algemene vlieg? Nee, dis aangename vlieg. And finally the ATC guy with a sense of humor said, ry maar, just go and geniet it and enjoy it. So that was, I thought so. It was typical of a lot of stuff, but we had a good time. The cadets, the pupil pilots as they were, they really excelled themselves. I never had any disciplinary incidents to deal with. Every Monday morning, the colonel used to call me and talk to me about what was going on. He never had any criticism of our guys. He was highly complimentary. And I tell you that the staff went out of their way to make us feel at home. We struck up some friendships then that I think are alive today. And they were a great professional outfit. The training was excellent. It was a very good experience for all of us.
Hugh, did you have anything to do with General Bob Rogers? Because I think he might even have been commander of the Air Force then, and he had a very strong affection for Rhodesia, I think, partly because his brother Buck was living in Rhodesia, lived in Enkhuizen, where he became a bit of a legend. But did you have anything to do with General Rogers?
Well, of course, I knew who he was. He was a wonderful general and chief of the Air Force. He was way beyond my pay grade, Hannes. I mean, guys like Norman and Frank Muscle and so on worked with Bob Rogers, and he was a great ally of Rhodesia. Highly respected man. I can still picture him just an absolute gentleman. But day-to-day dealings, no, I did not.
Hugh, It was actually just last night I was having another look at Ian Pringle's excellent book on Op Dingo. And
Yes.
there was a lot about that operation that I'd kind of forgotten about. It was an amazing operation. Virtually the whole Rhodesian Airforce was utilized. And I know you were very involved in the planning and in the actual operational side of it. Just tell us, talk us through what you remember of the attack on the big camp in Chimoio.
Yeah, look, Ian's book is first class, and I take my hat off to Ian. He did a huge amount of research. He contacted lots of people, did the analysis, and I think he's portrayed it extremely accurately. I was actually not involved in the planning so much because I was mostly flying wing Thornhill at the time. Sorry about the noise. Those are my roofers at work. If it comes through, I'm sorry.
Okay, don't worry.
So my involvement was, of course, our Thornhill squadrons were involved. One squadron was involved, 2 squadron was involved, 4 squadron was involved. The other squadrons were all out of Starum. But when I was OC flying Thornhill, my commanding officer was Group Captain Paul Yannicka. And he was a great commanding officer. He pretty much left me alone with the flying wing. But what he and I used to do for all these operations, Dingo included, was if there were any airplanes left over, we would beg or bribe or borrow or steal from the squadron and get the last couple of airplanes that were serviceable, and we'd go off and fly with the squadrons. So there was always Group Captain Paul Yannicka and Hugh Slatter tagging along on the back. It was normally the vampire formations. And we did our little bit and placed the operations firsthand. But my own contribution was small, other than trying to oversee some of the stuff. So congratulations to Ian Pringle. That was an op that needed to be recorded. And he did a great job. I think his story has far more in it than I could tell you ever, Hannes. But it was a successful operation, as you know, probably the biggest operation that we've mounted.
What was your specific task, you and Toll? What were you?
I was in an FB9, and I think Toll might have been in a T11. The squadron was using the T11s. Always in a ground attack role, Hannes. We would have targets identified, which might be buildings around the parade ground, or buildings nearby that stored weapons, or had some training of combatants connotation. So I seem to remember my target being man, you're really testing the memory now. I have a picture of a small building that I was tasked to hit with rockets. Toll was behind me on the strike. He said, your rocket just took out that building, Hugh. So that was a lucky strike for me. Rockets were never my strongest. I liked cannon. I was good at cannon, but rockets were never my strongest. So yeah, I think in my case, it was particularly a weapons storage building, not very big, but we did the job, and we all came back with it, you know. I'm trying to remember if it was Dingo where Phil Haig did not come back.
Yes,
it was Dingo. Yeah, he was flying back from Mozambique and had this problem and did a great forced landing in what looked like a decent area. And only when you're on the ground do you realize that the things that you haven't seen from above you hit a big ditch and broke in half. And Phil didn't survive it, sadly. But that was our only casualty that I remember on that day, anyway.
Yeah, Hugh, it was interesting. Ian mentions the fact that it was the biggest helicopter or airborne assault since the Vietnam War. When you look at that, the numbers, it was a big deal. The whole of the Rhodesian Air Force plus some borrowed aircraft from the South African Air Force, all involved.
It was huge, Hannes, and I'm sure people have seen the pictures of the choppers all lined up ready to go. And I forget the numbers, 31, 37, something like that. As you say, we purloined, big, borrowed steel, got serviceable. Our ground crews were fantastic. I mean, no Air Force in the world ever had serviceability rates like our Air Force. You know, the guys would come back, shot up, and by midnight, the guys would work through the night, and the next day, every airplane would be ready to go again, whether it was in Thornhill or Sarum or out at one of the FAFs or at the lineup. I mean, can't say enough good about our ground crews. They were fantastic.
Hugh, you were involved in a couple of externals, raids into Zambia as well. I think you were also flying vampires on.
Yeah.
on
I remember one in particular. Actually, it was a funny setup that we flew out of Fieldy, if I remember correctly,
Yes.
Hannes. You know, the big semi-secret airfield up north. It was an early morning strike, and I think I was the number 6 vampire going in for an attack. You never want to be number 6. You never want to be number 5. Ideally, number 1's good because that's the element of surprise. But by the time you're number 6, although it's only, I don't know, a matter of 20 or 30 seconds, you know, they pretty well were wide awake by then. Anyway, it was an attack down a long valley, and I don't remember the specific target. There was I don't remember if there was a tented camp or buildings. But anyway, we all put in our strikes. The hunters had gone in first, the cans as well, and then we were in. So everybody was wide awake. And when we were climbing out and heading back to Fieldy, Steve Kesley, who was the squadron commander, asked for a fuel check, and everybody's fuel was okay, except mine was a whole lot lower than others. So it might have been Steve that came under me and had a look, and I'd had some rounds through my fuel tanks. Anyway, that was a bit of excitement, but we all got back on the ground, and that was that. We didn't lose anybody on that raid, to my knowledge.
Probably a difficult question, but guys that you flew with who were exceptional flyers, I know they were all excellent airmen, but are there any chaps that really caught your eye who were just born with that extra bit of flying ability?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Hannes. I mean, the first one that springs to mind, excuse me, obviously, is Nigel Lam from 29 PDC. When he did his final handling test with me, that test was normally about an hour 15, and it was high stress. There was a lot of stuff going on. And you always gave the guy 10 or 15 minutes to show you an aeros routine that he'd put together. Now, aeros are akin to delivering weapons. You've got to be flying the airplane really well on its limits. And so when it came to Nigel's turn, and I said, have you got an aero sequence? And he said, yes. And quite honestly, I was floored. I mean, for 10 or 15 minutes, he did stuff. I mean, not just the basic stuff that honestly, I wasn't even sure how to grade the stuff. So when we landed, I spent some time with his instructor, first of all, and spoke to him, Tony Oakley, you may remember that. And then we got Nigel in, and I said, you know, I briefed him on the sortie, and then I said, when you get to aeros, you tell me about it, Nigel, because quite honestly, I wasn't entirely sure what to do. So the interesting background is he'd been a fanatic about aerobatics since he was a kid, apparently. And he'd studied it and studied it and studied it. And his flying was exceptional. I mean, his control was so smooth and yet so positive, and the maneuvers were complicated. So I would grade him as exceptional in that area, and I think that was borne out by what he went on to do with aerobatics in the world, and with Red Bull Racing, which is the same sort of finesse requirement. A couple of others to spring to mind. Dag Jones was an unusually gifted pilot, Group Captain Jones. And Mark Smithdorf on 7 Squadron is the only pilot I've ever known get an exceptional rating. You could always tell when Mark was flying, because when you were doing cargo swinging, it's very easy to get the cargo in an oscillation that makes it kind of hard to control the airplane. But you could always tell if Mark was coming into the LZ with the cargo string, because the cargo was just static, it was just hanging under the airplane all the way, which showed his absolute smooth and control of the airplane. So those are 3 people who spring to mind. There may be others, but that don't spring to mind at the moment. Those 3 said.
Tell us a little bit about your time with Nick Price, and I'd like you to lay it on very thick about how much you did to help him.
Well, you know, it's funny. When I was Field Force Unit 3 Brigade, as I told you, in Umtali, there were a couple of colonels who liked to golf there, and very occasionally, like once a month, we'd get a chance to go and have a game at Hillside. And they were good golfers. They were like 12s and they could play to a 12. I was probably, hell, I don't know, 14 or 15, and I couldn't really play to it. Anyway, I bumped into Nick in my comm center. I had one guy there from the territorial force, which was Nick, and I didn't know him, to help me in doing signals and all that, daily communication work. Anyway, he's a nice young man and so on, and of course, I kind of knew some of his background. And then I found out that I was actually able to call Nick up for his stints. And I said to him, what about bringing your golf clubs next time? Let's see if you're any good. So he did bring his golf clubs, and I said to these two colonels, are you guys up for another game sometime? Because we had like $5 on the game, which was quite a lot in those days, and a golf ball. And they said, yeah, of course, rubbing their hands, yeah, we'll take Slatter again. And so on. They said, who's going to play with you? Who's your fourth? I said, I don't know, I'll find someone. So Nick and I arrive at Hillside Golf Club, and these guys are there, and they take one look at Nick, and of course they know him, and they say, Slatter, you bastard. So they handed over $5 before the game started, and a golf ball. I seem to remember Nick shot 67, maybe, something like that. I still have to laugh. So, that was a great story. And then I said to Nick afterwards, Nick, look, I can run the comm center most afternoons. You go and golf if you get a chance. Just use your bit of time. So he would get time off and go and golf, and I loved it. There was a happy worker, and that makes for a happy office. So we had a good time, and that lasted. I wasn't in the field force unit very long. I was posted after 5 months to actually flying at Thornhill. But that was the grounding with Nick, and of course we remained firm friends after that, and we're still firm friends. And I've played a bit of golf with Nick. We've even won some tournaments together, or a tournament together.
Back to your story. Let's go up to the end of the war, and the decision you make a decision to stay.
Yeah, look, those were very difficult times, Hannes, and I had met Mugabe right at the end of the war. I'd met some of the guys at the Lord Soames talks. Bertie Barnard and I were the Rhodesians. Tunga Marai and Nongo were the Zandler, and Musuku and Dabengwa were the Zebra guys. And Musuku and Dabengwa were pretty impressive, let me tell you. I felt that we were not well prepared enough. But anyway, as a result of that and the fact that these people we were going to work with them, I just decided I was born here. I'm not leaving. And as Toll said it right, he said there was no wrong or right decision. Those who decided to stay, stayed for a reason, and those who decided to leave, left for a reason. And I respect the opinion of those, or the decision of those who left, just as they've respected my decision to stay. And shortly after that all went through, I was sometimes called to brief Mugabe on the situation, what was going on. But in those early days, I'm so sorry, he was very amenable. He was very polite always. He would ask questions of me. He would always thank me for the briefing. The questions were sensible questions, and I tried to answer them as competently as I could. So my initial impressions of him were actually pretty good, Hannes, and I thought this is okay. This was a good decision. I can actually play a role in shaping our Air Force, in maintaining our Air Force, maintaining security for the country. That all changed, as you know. I don't know if you want to get into this unfortunate incident now where the sabotage of Thornhill took place in August of '82. And we had a lot of our strike aircraft blown up. We formed a board of inquiry with good people, Phil Pyle, Pete Briscoe, and they started their work. I was chief of air staff, so I was not privy to their work because I was going to have to rule on the board of inquiry later on. And I actually happened to be on vacation when this incident took place. I was actually up at Nyanga fly fishing with one of the guys from the US consul, a really, really nice guy called Peter Shields. And I got a call from the ops Gordon Wright saying, there's been a major problem at Thornhill, and you need to talk to the commander. So I gave Norman a call, and he said, look, there's not much you can do. But anyway, I just packed my bags in Inanga and went home that day and went to see Norman, and he explained some of the stuff to me. So I took a trip down to Thornhill to see the extent of the damage. It was horrific. I mean, as someone who loves airplanes, it's going to break your heart to see that stuff. And the guys there had done this amazing job of pulling the airplanes out of burning hangars and risking their lives, literally, you know, with a lot of people involved in this stuff, just brave acts. Stuff blowing up, I understand, ammo going off, all sorts of horrendous stuff. Anyway, 5 Brigade had been put onto Thornhill a few weeks after that on my visit, and were misbehaving. Their lack of discipline was horrendous. There was so much suspicion pointed against the whites in the Air Force. Minister Ushira Kunzi, who at that stage I think was, well, I don't remember what ministry he held. It certainly wasn't defense, but he banned any airplanes flying out of Thornhill. So essentially, I had no way to get back home that night. But I had to get a chopper back to Saran to be serviced, and I hitched a ride on the chopper and got back that way and went to see Norman. And I said, you know, unless we find a way to stop this antagonism towards the whites, we're doomed. The Air Force is finished. So Norman did his best, but there was too much antagonism, and it just got worse and worse. And the board members were being arrested, starting with Barry Lloyd, who was a young security officer. He was tortured into making false statements. And then they just worked up the line. Wing Commander Johnny Cox, Pete Briscoe off the board, and Phil Pyle and myself, we were arrested. And just the whole horrendous saga started there. I was picked up at home. Actually, I was asked to go into headquarters. I was on vacation, but I was in and out of the office. And some members of the CIO arrived there and started looking through my office. And I said, what are you looking for? You know, what do you want? I can help. What do you want to find? And they wouldn't talk to me. And then they said, they want to go to your house and see what's there. I said, sure, come with me, that's fine. So we went to the house, and they were poking around. And again, I said, you know, what is it that you guys want? You know, tell me what it is. Is there something that I can help you? They said, you need to come with us. And luckily, as they were driving me out in their car now, Jane, my wife, arrived. And I said, I'm just going with these guys for some questioning. I'll see you later on. Well, of course, I didn't see Jane basically for weeks after that, because they gave me, and they'd given the others a hard time, moving us around through police cells throughout the country at night, always hooded, never knowing really what we were. And then I guess when things came to a head, I was being held, I found out, at a Mvuma police station. One night, you know, I'd had these interrogations daily by various police members, giving them statements about what the Air Force was doing and my role in the Air Force and so on, which they just promptly tore up and said, no, you must tell us how you blew up the airplanes. You guys are nuts. Anyway, the one night as I was lying in my cell, I could actually, this had been about the 12th or 13th night, I think, or something like that. I could actually, all I had on was a cotton shirt. It had been summertime. It was getting into summer, September, August, September. And my pants, I could feel just getting baggier and baggier because there wasn't any food to speak of and not a hell of a lot of water. Anyway, I heard this commotion going on outside, and I could hear Pete Briscoe's voice. I was sure Pete, so, you know, they were shouting at him, saying, get in the car, get in the car. And he disappeared. Oh, I was being checked in. I was in another area. So when I went through to the cells, I found on the cells some boiled sweets left by the iron bed there, or the mattress on the ground. And I thought, well, that must have been Pete. So looking back now, what was happening is they were taking Pete away for more sophisticated torture. They always claimed it was the 5th Brigade, but that's what they like to say. And then I knew no more about that, except a few days later, one of the big wigs from the CIA came and said, you really have to confess here, otherwise there are people who do things to you that are not nice. I said, I don't have anything to confess, you guys. You know, you don't understand, I've told you everything. So they whisked me away in a car, hooded, And I learned later we went up near Matoka. I really didn't know where we were. We got there at night, put into a cell, dragged out of the cell with the CIO interrogation team. And the one guy seemed quite logical, at least. I thought, well, thank God, maybe we can talk about it. But the other guy was just a raving lunatic. And they went on, and he was saying, you know, you've lied all along. I said, my statements were the truth, you know, and I stick by them. So they said, well, there'll be people who'll take you away and they'll do bad things to you. When you've had enough, tell them you want Mwiri, was his name. I thought, that's very weird. So they put me back in the cell. Sure enough, a little while later, I'm hooked out, put in, because you can't see who's taking you, put in a, I guess it was a Land Rover, it felt like a Land Rover, and take it driven out into the bush. And they kept saying it's 5th Brigade, we're going to Nyanga. And I thought, well, that's not good news if that's true. But anyway, we didn't go far enough to get to Nyanga. And then the torture started, and that was never any fun. They had me rolled over on my stomach in the back. I'm sure it felt like a Jeep, those hard seats you get in the Jeep there. But someone sitting on my legs so that I couldn't move. I had my hands manacled. They were behind my back, and then they put them in the front, and they had bandages around my wrists so they could keep these things quite tight. And then they started the electric bit. I felt little pricks going on in my back. I didn't know what they were. But it was the start of the torture, obviously. And then that went on. Seemed like for a long time. It probably wasn't that long, an hour or more. And each time they would torture you, they'd ask you a question. They'd shown me Pete's statement. They'd shown me John Cox's statement with all the right answers, quote unquote. And if I didn't give them the right answer, the torture carried on. If I gave them the right answer, the torture stopped for a bit. So eventually, and I think I was double hooded and having a real hard time breathing. And in a lot of pain from these back spasms, obviously. And finally, after however long it was, they said, okay, you've given us some good answers. We want more like that. And I said, okay, I'll give you some answers. And they said, okay, we'll ask you a few more questions. And then this thing started again. And I thought, geez, you know, this is crazy. So finally I said, okay, I'll give you a statement. And they said, it better be a good statement. So I said, okay. And then they started I guess just for fun at the end of all that stuff. And then they stopped suddenly, and they took my handcuffs off the front and put them on the back again, sat me in the Jeep. Never forget this, driving back, there was someone who put his hand on my leg. I guess I was shaking uncontrollably at that stage. And just to settle me down, I thought, well, this must be, in my view, one of the good old constables who didn't like what he'd seen and figured that he didn't want to be part of it. Anyway, long story made short, the next day they made me write out a statement, basically responding to those questions. And they were very happy. They said, this is good, we're off to the court, you can verify your statement. So we went to a nearby magistrate's court, and they said, we're going to be waiting outside, so don't change your statement. Make sure that it's all just like you've given us. So you're standing there. I must have looked a real sight. 14 days or something like that. No shaving, no washing, no clothes, no new clothes. And the magistrate said to me, "Do you confirm your statement?" And I wouldn't answer him. I didn't know what to do. Quite honestly, I could see the Wiri and the other guys just outside the window next to me, and they could hear what I was saying. So he asked me again. He said, "I want to confirm your statement. Is it all true?" And I didn't answer. And he said, "You don't seem very happy." And I said, "No, I'm not." He said, "Well, I'm going to confirm your statement because you won't tell me one way or another." So that was it. I guess he signed it. They whisked me away. They were delighted. Took me to a police station nearby, and there I bumped into Pete Briscoe. Poor old Pete, who was distraught beside himself. He said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "Pete, you've done nothing wrong. We've done nothing." So long story made short, we were moved to Chikarubi. Sorry, not to Chikarubi, to Salisbury Remand, first of all. Here's a bit of levity. As we going in and getting checked in, one of the super nice black guys, I mean, there were so many super nice black guys there, he comes over and he's like, "Bloods, Peter, what are you doing here?" And this was Lovemore, if I remember his name rightly, Tudor Thomas's cook or gardener or whatever it is from Thornhill. And Peter said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And Lovemore said, "I've been a bad boy." So anyway, that was some levity to the situation. The next day, we were able to see the lawyers who came. examined us. I think they were in as much of a state of shock as we were. Mike Hartman, my guy, was having a tough time. I don't know if you know Mike Hartman, he became a judge at Hong Kong. Super good guy. Brett Gardner and others. And anyway, long story made short, they decided that course of action that we would fight through the courts about our torture and what they'd done to us, and denial to lawyers, and how we'd be moved around the countryside so that our lawyers couldn't get to us. And then we were sent to Guerrilla prison, spent, I don't know, 10 months there. And I must say, look, the prison guys were okay. They were the old school. They even addressed me as sir from time to time. They had us look after the other prisoners. I had no qualms. They were all terrified of the CIO. Whenever the CIO showed up, there was a panic. It shows you the power that the CIO weren't accountable to anyone, in my view. They just did their thing. Eventually, we were moved to Chickarubi. We got this good lawyer because they threatened to arrest our lawyers. They charged our lawyers. Anybody who supported Slatter or Powell or Briscoe must be a criminal also. So we went through that, and then we ended up in Chickarubi, and my wife and others had helped us get a very good lawyer from the UK. We weren't able to get the very good guy from South Africa, but we got a wonderful guy from the UK called Harry Agnel. He was actually the successful prosecutor in the Yorkshire Ripper case. And he was remarkable throughout our trial, which went 9 weeks. He never got an African name wrong, never got a time wrong, never got a fact wrong, and he just laid the police lies to waste and the CIA. We had an excellent judge. He was the High Court, the judge of the Supreme Court, Judge Enoch Dumbachena.
Yeah.
He was Mugabe's top judge. And initially I was fearful that this would be a political trial, but he was so astute, so meticulous, so thorough. And we had 2 assessors in the court. It's not like the jury system in the US. One was an ex-police compol and the other was a businessman. He spent most of the time asleep at sea. But anyway, after all the evidence and all the lies from the police, and even the police actually the prosecutor removed their one witness for too many lies. I mean, Agnel would ask him a question, say, you said that at 7:30 you were in Motoko at the police station. Yes. And then you said at 7:30 you were in Morewa at a club. Yes. So which is true? They are both true. So it was that sort of nonsense that went on. And Agnel had said to us, look, I'm not going to come into town as the big shot lawyer. I'm going to go along with the stuff. We'll keep it all low-key. Don't get panicked if I don't challenge a lot of the stuff. But he was very level-headed, very grounded, and just eviscerated the prosecution. So the judge shut the trial down after 9 weeks, and he went to consider all the evidence. For 5 weeks, we sat at Chickarubi waiting for the result. And then we all go into town. But we started the trial, I should tell you this. I said to the guys, we're going to wear a uniform to the court. We're all serving officers. No one has fired us or disbanded us, so let's get our uniforms. So when we showed up in the courthouse, we came up from underground, and the prosecutor just about exploded. I mean, here we were all in number ones, the Air Force officers, and he just lost it. So the judge said, stop. And he called Harry Agnel and the prosecutor into his rooms, and they debated for a while. He said, okay, the court is adjourned. I'd like you officers to take your uniforms off. You can wear proper civilian clothes. The prosecutor wanted us in prison garb, obviously. So we wore civilian clothes for the rest of the trial. But I mean, that's the sort of sensible judge that we had. He was not prejudiced or predisposed to any judgment. He heard all the evidence. So we all show up again for the judgment, and he starts his judgment. It was a long thing, but basically he found that because we had been denied access to lawyers, because we'd been tortured and proven by medical evidence, we had doctors examine us in prison, the statements that we'd made were inadmissible. And the statements were the only evidence against us. So the whole thing fell apart. There was nothing else. And he said, you're all innocent and you're free to go. So big applause in the court. I mean, the courts were packed and so on. And as we're going downstairs to get our things, someone arrives from outside with an order. It's a detention order signed by Dr. Herbert Ushiwakunzi for indefinite detention. So back to Chikurubi we go. And there was an outcry, of course. There was actually an outcry from the world. It was the UK finally stepped up and did the decent thing and said this is wrong. US did the decent thing. Anyway, long story made short, we got several visits from our lawyers over the next 10 days, and they said, they want you to go, Slatter, you and Pyle, because they accept that you were not involved, and the others will go later. And I said, I'm not going anywhere without the others, so don't pull that trick on us. We're not doing that. I don't trust these guys further than I can. So they went back, and we had this argy-bargy for a few days, and they came back and they said, look, I don't think these guys are playing. They've given us a commitment that they will release the others. They will not release anybody, yourself included, unless you guys leave now. So we went back and we spoke amongst ourselves, the six of us, and we all agreed it was better. Phil and I could probably do more out of the country than we could in the country. So we agreed, and I think it was the very next morning, one of the guards came in, and they were pretty decent guys. They were also, he said, you're leaving tonight. And I said, oh, how do you know that? And he said, I just heard it on the BBC. So I said, okay, that's the good old grapevine. So at about 4 o'clock that afternoon, we were called from our cells, Phil and I, and we went downstairs and we were given our civilian clothes. The really, really nice prison officer there who'd had to play it pretty cool. He was white. There was so much racialism going on. Mike Mays was his name. I'm sure he doesn't mind if I mention his name now. Very understanding. So we waited and we chatted to him in his office, and the flight was at 9 o'clock that night out to London, as far as I knew, because our wives had said, here's some traveller's checks, $300 traveller's checks, here's a suitcase, and you're going to London. And that was it. We weren't allowed anymore. So at about 8 o'clock, no one had arrived to fetch us, and then at about 8:15, this bunch of guys arrives who I assume was probably CIO or police, and they handcuffed us again. And I said, what are you guys doing? And they said, well, we're taking you to the airport now. So I said, well, you know, we're free men. And they said, no, you have to go for your own safety. So we got out to the airport, and they said, okay, get out. We're late on time. You've got to go to the airplane now. And I said, I'm not getting out. I'm not getting out in handcuffs here. You guys can forget it. I mean, honestly, Hannes, at that stage, I was, to use that wonderful Afrikaans expression, I was hurtful. I'd had it with these guys in every way. And I think when they realized that I was serious, there were some panicked phone calls, and then they said, okay, we'll take the handcuffs off. So we walked into the terminal. I saw my mother and my wife briefly as we walked through, straight through customs immigration. They took my passport, wrote something in it, which I found out later on was PI, which I guess means prohibited immigrant. And off to the plane, straight up the stairs, and the plane's ready to go. I mean, we're the last people there. And off we go. And then, of course, Tony Thomas, the captain of the airplane, welcomed us on board, which was a lovely thing to do. But I went to him after and said, Tony, don't do this. Because when he announced that Phil and I were there, the whole cabin broke into applause. We, of course, were in coach section. But unbeknownst to us, there was a minister in the first class section. So about midnight, I asked the cabin crew if I could go and talk to Tony. And I went and said to him, thank you for the welcome, but don't jeopardize yourself here. So these guys are paranoid. He said, no, there's no problem. Anyway, it turned out subsequently when he got back, he was reprimanded, he was grounded for a year, and he had to have a legal fight to get his job back. And then I think shortly after he left. Anyway, we landed in Gatwick to a mob of press who wanted all sorts of questions and so on. And I just said, look, we can't answer questions. Here's a prepared statement. Please understand that our guys are still locked up there. We cannot jeopardize their safety. So Phil went his way. He had lots of contacts from his days of being in London. And I had friends in Warwick. And then we started this process of finding work and getting ourselves resolved and keeping pressure on the government to get our guys released. And then Pete was released about 2 weeks later. We went to meet him and welcome him. And then it was a long time. It was 2 or 3 months before we were able to get the other guys out. But eventually they did stick to their word and they released them all. And we developed some plans, or with the help of others, and I told Johnny Cox, who was the senior guy when we left, don't despair about this thing that we're going. If they're in aid, we will get you out. We will rescue you. And I can't say any more than that, but we'll do it. So I hope that gave them some reassurance, but it wasn't necessary, thank goodness. And so here we are to this day. I don't know where Barry is. Barry, I think, is in Australia somewhere. Neville Ware is in the UK. Phil Pyle is in Malawi. Johnny Cox is in South Africa. Pete Briscoe sadly died after being in the States a few years from a dreadful brain tumor. And I'm here in the States. So that's the Thornhill Six, as we were known in those days. And,
just talk a little bit about your reception. I mean, you arrived in England with nothing. From a political point of view, you were a bit of a, Mrs. Thatcher was Prime Minister at the time. And I gather you were a bit of an embarrassment, because at the time, the British government was trying to maintain the warmest possible relationship with the Mugabe administration. And you guys were a bit of a political hot potato.
Yeah, that's true, Hannes. Although I must say this, I requested a meeting with Margaret Thatcher. I got a nice letter from her. I didn't get a meeting. I did get a meeting with Minister Rifkind, who was the Foreign Affairs Minister. And I went through this thing at length with him, and he was very courteous, and he listened, but he said, we're working really hard to make sure that these people keep their promises. They kept their promise in releasing people. They didn't keep their promise about pensions or something, because as you rightly said, we left with basically nothing. I left with a suitcase and 300 Zimbabwe dollars of traveler's checks, which doesn't go very far. Yeah, it was difficult. In fact, the friends we were staying with after a while said, you should apply for aid, Hugh, because the British government is responsible for some of this. So I did apply for aid. I got on the dole, the good old dole, for a few weeks. It wasn't very much, but it was enough to help put food on the table with our friends there, Roy and Bobby Neep. I can't say enough about them. They took me in. Bobby was working, Roy was working. I had no job. I was trying to write thank you letters to everybody around the world, known and unknown people who'd addresses I'd been given, who'd prayed for us and helped us through prison and sent donations for our lawyers. I mean, the lawyers were not inexpensive, and we had to sell all our property and everything to pay for.
Just tell us about the Americans. In a sense, the Americans came to your rescue. There was an American senator who got involved. I forget.
A wonderful man. He was actually in Africa at the time that we were incarcerated. Senator Tom Eagleton.
Yes.
I say that with reverence because he was just a remarkable man. They were on a tour, a fact-finding tour through Africa, and there were Senators Hatfield and Laxalt, and they were with President Bush, if I remember. But Eagleton, General Walls managed to, Paul Yannicka, bless him, got hold of General Walls and said, through your good officers, can you get some sort of meeting arranged? And General Walls agreed and managed to get an interview with Tom Eagleton and explain these circumstances to him. And Tom, bless him, took it upon himself to follow up and to put pressure on through the US government. So he and the British government eventually put enough pressure on to make this stuff happen. That was the start of the story with Tom. What I didn't know was, until he did this later on, he got hold of us, and I actually wanted to go and see him in the US and say thank you for helping us get out of jail. And Jane, in her wisdom, when she wasn't allowed to take money out of the country, bought the furthest air ticket that she could buy from Harare, that happened to be to LA. So I had some miles left, and I flew out to Washington, D.C. I wanted to look Tom in the eye and say thank you for rescuing us, all our guys, and putting pressure on the government. So when I landed there at the airport, he said, please come and stay with me for a week, and so it was nice. So I landed, and there's a guy standing with a sign saying Hugh Slatter. So I go over there, and I assume it's Tom's driver. So we get in the car and off we go. And I'm talking about Tom Eagleton and the fact that I'm going to stay with him. And after a while, he says, Hugh, I'm Tom. This is me. I'm Tom. And I'm I could have swallowed my tongue and like, oh God, you came out to the airport to fetch me and so on. Anyway, I stayed with him, and he was a wonderful guy because each morning he would take me to the Capitol, to his office, and then we'd have a breakfast with Martin Marietta or Boeing or GE or General Dynamics or Northrop. And I suddenly realized what he was doing. He was exposing me to the industry in the hopes that someone might pick me up and give me a job. And sure enough, I got a couple of job offers. And long story made short, I ended up with General Electric, thanks again to Tom. I mean, he didn't stop at getting us released. He wanted to see us grounded. And he did the same. He helped Pete Briscoe, of course. So now the irony with all this is that Tom went back to South Africa, and he was in Cape Town, must have been about 10 years ago now, when he picked up pneumonia, came home and died after a visit to South Africa. It was so sad because we were good friends. We used to visit him in St. Louis. He was the senior senator in government at that time. He was the senator for Missouri. Yes. He had done 3 full terms of 6 years each. And just a remarkable guy, the most humble. And I said to him one time, Tom, why did you take on this cause to look after a white man in Africa? It's not a popular cause. And he looked me in the eye and he said, Hugh, it was the right thing to do. As simple as that it is.
What a great story, Hugh. What a great story.
I'm a huge fan of the Democratic Party. And I said to him, Tom, if all Democrats were like you, I'd be stumping for you every day. But, sadly, they're not. And today's Democrats are certainly not like Eagle. But yeah, he was a wonderful man, Desmond.
Well, Hugh, a fascinating story. And just so pleased it all ended up well for you, and you comfortably ensconced on the West Coast. You're an American, and I think you did say at one stage that you actually owe a thank you to Robert Mugabe.
In a roundabout way, I do, Hannes. I'm here safe. My family's safe. Yeah. Listen, Hannes, I want to say thanks to you. Just take this opportunity while I'm on for all the good work that you do, for your books, your articles, and not least of all for agreeing to publish my book, which was a bit of a dodgy one, but you did. And it's done okay. And we've made contributions, you and I, to veterans organizations and pensioners. And I'm proud of that. I'm sure you are too. So thank you for all your help.
Well, Hugh, it's a privilege having you as a friend. And I'm pleased I could help you a little bit, and I hope this little chat just gets the story out there. And I think it's just good that these stories are on the record for people to understand better what was going on, and we're doing a little bit for our history.
I agree with you, Hannes. My book started as I wanted a record for my family. And then so many people showed an interest that was when I thought, what if we publish it? And you kindly agreed to publish it. And I think it is right. There's a bit of history recorded there. It's an autobiography, which turns a lot of people off, but an autobiography is an autobiography. So it is what it is. And I'm glad that it's brought funds to people who otherwise wouldn't have had funds. So
yeah,
I'm proud of that.
Well, thanks, Hugh. Thanks very much for your time, and hope to see you soon, maybe on the golf course, and price by the drinks.
We'll try and get Nick out, yeah. If we tie one hand behind his back, we might have a chance.
That's for sure. Great.
All right, but thanks so much.
Cheers.
Take care, Hannah.